Hi everyone. This afternoon we have Do Scammers Dream of Electric Fish? Lessons learned from deploying AI-based phishing ops by Daniel Marques. Daniel's been a red team leader with over 20 years of cybersecurity experience helping Fortune 500 companies uncover and remediate vulnerabilities. He's skilled at bridging executives and technical teams to reduce cybersecurity risk across industries. He's been a research presenter at ISC2's Security Conference, HughesecCon, and Black Hat Regional Summit in Sao Paulo. And he's a member of the winning team at the DEF CON Biohacking Village Capture the Flag in 2019. Please welcome to the stage, Daniel Marques.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you all for coming. So, in the past year, you probably read the news about how AI is helping scammers to be more efficient in terms of sending phishing messages or performing attacks. You've been probably, especially here in Texas, right? You've been hammering with people asking you for money for tolls and all sorts of attacks that could potentially be expended by AI. So this research is basically my attempt to try to reproduce that and to test that assumption that somebody can really gain efficiencies using AI, specifically Gen AI. So I went all the way to see what the extension is of that premise, if it's really true or not, what can be achieved. And my primary attempt here is that I would not use any coding during this research. So I try to do low effort, low cost, and see how far I could go building a end-to-end workflow to deploy a phishing attack. So a quick disclaimer, the views here are my own and not of my employers. That's a very traditional disclaimer. If you're working in the industry, you probably saw 20 of those today. This is just one more for your collection. And I'm Daniel, the guy in the picture right there. You can scan the QR code. That takes you to my LinkedIn profile. That's where I'm going to put my slides. So right after the talk, you should be able to see my slides there. If not, later tonight, please reach out. You can ask any questions you want. I'm going to be very happy to connect with you and talk about this research. This is the phase one of a bigger research that I'm conducting. The next steps here is I'm going to attempt to create a phishing as a service tool so you don't have to, right? So I want to go as far as building the tool that's going to completely deploy the scenario, and this is my first step towards that direction. So, like I said, the first premise that we are testing here is if Gen AI really can help scale phishing campaigns. It turns out it can, and very well, at least some of the aspects of the phishing campaign. So you're probably going to hear a lot of good talkers and like here in the conference talking about AI and how AI can help you become more efficient. I'm speaking tomorrow again about this very same topic about how to augment offensive security operations using AI. But the bottom line here is you need to understand your workflow before Gen AI can become a tool to improve any of your activities. Phishing is no different. So it can help you scale, it can help you make campaigns easier, and with minimal code, you're going to see me deploying a phishing campaign from end to end. So that's what we're going to see today. And we start that by looking at your typical phishing workflow. So if you've been doing red teaming and pen testing for a while, or if you're a blue teamer, you probably saw this workflow, right? It starts with recon. You're going to collect as much information as you can, try to understand your target, try to see how far you can go and the type of information that you can get. Then you create a pretext, how you're going to deploy your scenario, exactly what is going to make the users click your phishing emails, what's going to make them follow through your attack. Then you're going to deploy the infrastructure. You're going to create your website, your phishing server, you're going to create your mail server, you're going to create your email account, so on and so forth. Buy your domain, so on and so forth. Then you're going to craft your emails, making sure that they're good enough to make the user click through. And finally, you're going to launch your campaign. So when you look into this workflow, there's plenty of opportunities here for automation. Not all of them will be AI automated, but there's plenty of opportunities here for you to create scripts and tools that will help you through this process. So starting with the recon, you can have data collection and correlation, you can have a scenario creation, and here's a good opportunity for Gen AI to help us out. You have to deploy your infrastructure. There's also another opportunity here when you think about your Terraform scripts and some of the infrastructure as a code. So you have Claude and you have GPT-5. They're perfectly capable of generating code. We can argue about the quality of that code, and we can talk about that later, but they are capable of generating some code and help you with the deployment of this infrastructure. And finally, the text generation for your craft email. Here, I'm going to target more the pre-text creation and the email crafting. Those two are the ones that I got the best results when it comes to using Gen AI for some of this work. So that's what I'm going to be focused on for this presentation. But I'm happy to discuss the others and sit down with you guys and show some of the progress that I've made so far. Now, if you've been doing this for a while, you know how much effort you would have to put this together, right? I remember when I was a tester many, many moons ago, it would take us days to set up the infrastructure, to create the email that we know. You would bypass your anti-phishing tools, something that the users are going to create that is compelling enough for the users to click. So it took us a while to get to a point that we are comfortable sending that, especially when it comes to a red team operation, which is 90% of what we do. Now, we are seeing threat actors abusing AI for phishing based on research from different companies. So Microsoft released this report last year, walking through different threat actors that are using LLMs for activities related to phishing and social engineering. And you also have OpenAI releasing a recent report about some of the operations that they were able to stop of threat actors using AI for social engineering attacks, either for translation of what they're trying to achieve, translation of communications between the attacker and the victim, or to generate code. We're going to focus on the social engineering aspect of this, specifically trying to mimic the activities of those three threat actors. So the first thing that I did here for this research was to try to figure out exactly what the threat actors are doing and how I could replicate that. And I used those two reports to understand that a little bit better. So starting with Emerald Sleet, they are using LLMs to generate regionalized content. What that means is that you don't have to learn German or Hebrew or English or Chinese anymore. The LLMs can help you generate these contents without you having to go through a lot of effort to generate them, right? You might not be perfect, but might be just good enough that somebody's going to accept and click through your phishing email. The second one is Crimson Sandstorm that is using LLMs to generate phishing emails and web scraping. You're going to see that some of the work that we are performing here ties back into this, right? So one of the questions that I wanted to answer was the quality of the websites generated by some of the LLMs that we have available, and specifically the public ones and the services that are being mass used. Here I'm focusing on Claude and I'm focusing on ChatGPT. So you're going to see their abilities to perform these activities. And then we have Charcoal Typhoon that is using LLMs for translations and communications. Now, this is a Chinese threat actor, and the one that was stopped by OpenAI was also a Chinese threat actor, which I thought was interesting because we are talking about research that is pretty much 6 months, almost a year apart, and we're still seeing the same TTPs being reproduced over and over again, which is extremely interesting for you as a blue teamer and as a red teamer to try to reproduce the same attacks. So all you're going to see through this research are these same activities, right? So I try to reproduce exactly what the threat actors are doing and see how effective those LLMs are into generating these activities. Does that mean that as simple as it gets, the threat actors do not have any concerns? Absolutely not. So it's not that easy to go through this process. From a user perspective, yes, you can go there and you can create emails and you can create web pages using the LLMs, but there are some concerns here that you have to have, even if you're a threat actor or if you're a red teamer. The first one is OPSEC and monitoring. Now, as I mentioned before, this research is based on intelligence reports that are collected from different sources. How did I get access to that? Well, that was published by OpenAI, by Google, and by Claude, by Anthropic. if they know what you're doing or what the threat actors are doing, it means that they know what you're doing, right? They're obviously monitoring what's happening in their tools and in their platforms. And you can tell that because recently in the news, you saw some of those platforms releasing that they are monitoring the traffic in the chats and they're sending that to law enforcement so law enforcement can take actions. And they're going to actively try to stop you into some of those activities, which is interesting. I was playing a CTF a couple months ago, and I was using, last month actually, and I was using GPT-5 to help me with the CTF. So I was very interested in understanding how far I could go with GPT-5 to help me to solve some of these challenges. What I think was cool is that it continued to give me an answer, even if the answer was wrong, and then I started to push back on it, asking why it was giving me the wrong answer. You would expect that it assumes I was hallucinating and try to give me better answers, right? That's not what happened. What happened is the model replied to me saying, what you're trying to do is malicious. So I'm giving you these answers because I cannot give you proper answers because that will violate my safety policies. I thought it was kind of cool that the model was trying to deceive me. It was a little nasty, but it's cool nevertheless, right? It means that you do need a human in the middle to try to get the better from these tools if you're trying to do something in the offensive security space, right? So it's not going to be straightforward for you to generate some of that, but we're going to talk a little bit about how I achieved some of the results that I achieved from a prompt level. The second one ties back into that conversation, the guardrails and the jailbreaking, right? The guardrails that some of these tools are applying seems to be stopping some of the activities that I perform, and I'm constantly retrying some of the prompts that I generated and see how far I can go. What is interesting here is that although we can jailbreak some of the models, especially the local models that I've tried, and I went through an effort to try to jailbreak them, most of the times it's not completely necessary for you to jailbreak the models that I was trying to target. Primarily because these models, they are designed to help you. They're designed to be helpful and to make you happy. And I'm using air quotes here. Sometimes all you got to do is to ask the right questions. So what I did for some of the emails that I generated, I went the route of asking the model to assume the role of a marketing email creator. So instead of create me a phishing email, what I asked was like, all right, you are an email marketeer. Can you help me create the most engaging email for people to click through considering this scenario? And it will go through because that's not a malicious activity per se, right? But from time to time, I start using the other LLMs and other models. So if I'm using Anthropic to generate the email, I would use ChatGPT to double check it and vice versa to check the intent of the message. And I noticed that that was being picked up as a potentially malicious message, and that could potentially fall into email filters. So I created a feedback loop to change the email until it didn't see that as something malicious, as an malicious intention. Finally, the last concern is fake models and bad data. So a lot of the research that I'm seeing tries to bypass some of those concerns by using local models that are available at Hugging Face. You can do that, but you have to be very, very careful with the fake models. All right, so I did a quick comparison between the models and the platforms, and what are the good and the bad that I could see in some of those platforms. I tested primarily OpenAI, Mistral, Anthropic. I tried Olama a little bit and Google Gemini. I don't have a lot of good results here on Olama and Gemini. I had for some other stuff, but it's not part of the scope of this talk, right? So I'm going to focus on the top three. So the first thing that I try to do is to get an email that I had and try to change the content of the email into something that looked like phishing, right? So what you're seeing here, and I'm a University of San Diego alumni, and I got a lot of emails from them. So I extracted the HTML from that email and tried to substitute the text for something that was generated by the LLM, and I specifically told it to generate that based on that HTML. I didn't have to do any coding. I didn't have to write anything. That was all created by the models. So my first try here was with GPT 4.1. You can see that the formatting is better than Claude, but it misses the content, right? It misses the context of what I'm trying to put there. While in Sonnet, it was better at the context. I also try to generate pages based on that content, and you can see in Claude Sonnet 4 and in GPT-5 the difference between both of them. So that's my attempt to do web scraping. What I think is interesting is that Sonnet tried to generate the page for me, while GPT-5 gave me code to go and do the web scraping. The code worked, and it was able to generate the page, but that's not what I intended to do. What I intended to do is to do more straightforward, point it out to a URL and ask them to download the HTML right after, and they were not able to do exactly that. So we're gonna get there a little bit later. But Mistral flat out refused to do it. It said, I cannot do that, I don't know how to do it, your problem, bad luck, no cigar. Now, I tried to craft my prompts a little bit better and see how far I could go by asking GPT-5 to generate that page for me. What is interesting here is that GPT-5 and Claude can read through a picture and replicate that picture for you. So if you generated a wireframe from a web page that you're working on, you can send that to the model, and the model will generate the code for that wireframe. So I thought, well, how about I take a screenshot from one of those pages, put it into ChatGPT and Claude, and see how far they can go. Another interesting detail here is that this prompt was generated by ChatGPT for ChatGPT. So I asked the model to generate the prompt for me that would be the most efficient prompt to achieve that task. So I provided a screenshot. This is the prompt that I generated, and asked to do it for me. On top, you can see the original. On the bottom, you can see the version that was generated by GPT-5. That's a functional HTML that I could click around and make it work. This was ready enough that I could just upload to a server, and it would be perfectly functional as a login page to capture the data that I needed to capture. So from a phishing perspective, that's pretty good. I tried the same thing with Claude. Again, this is Claude's answer, right? So I uploaded that picture. I asked Claude to generate the prompt for me. That was the prompt that was generated. You can see that it's actually telling the tool what to do based on the picture, right? Like it's telling Sonnet what to do based on the picture. And this is the result. Again, it's not perfect, but it's close enough, right? My objective here was to do zero coding. So I didn't do any changes, right? But some of that, I could perfectly well go into the HTML code and change a few things here and there, like the fonts or the redirectors or the links to make it more suitable to what I was trying to achieve. But now, instead of coding everything from scratch and running a bunch of tools to do that, I could do it in a matter of seconds. Keep in mind, I did not even have to write the prompts myself. I asked GPT and Claude to generate the prompts for me. Now, a lot of these activities took a lot of trial and error, right? Primarily because of the guardrails that they have. So both GPT-5 and Claude would tell me to be careful because I might not be the owner of the intellectual property that I was trying to clone, which is a fair assumption, right? But local models might do a better job for you than what you have in GPT-5 and what you have in Claude publicly available. You can make modifications to your models so they are more inclined to do what you want to do. There are models that are specifically for offensive security. So you have here White Rabbit Neo that I gave some shot, and it was fairly interesting and did a pretty good job in some of the activities that I was trying to perform. And this is another model that I thought was interesting that generates phishing emails. Although the emails that it generated were not as good as the results that I got from the public models, it's still capable of doing it, and you can still integrate that in some of your tooling to give it a shot and do the modifications that you gotta do. There is some effort here, one, to do a lot of testing because these models might be bad, might be malicious, and they might be collecting data from you that you don't know about. But they also might need some training, and you might need to have some effort in training those models, which I did not have to do when using ChatGPT and Claude. All right. This is another interesting model that I started playing around when I was doing this research. This is a model to detect phishing attempts, right? So the idea here is that you can bring up this model and offer the model emails and ask the model to classify the emails as phishing or not phishing. One thing that I start thinking here is that if it's able to classify phishing for me, it means that I can send my emails, my phishing emails there, and see if it's phishing or not. If it passes, I can shoot against another, against my victim. If it stuck, I can make changes. I can ask the model what made it think that this is, a phishing attempt. Use that feedback to change my email and send it over again, and create this loop up to a certain point to try and improve my emails, which I ended up doing using ChatGPT and Claude. Now, I'm going to move now to the practical side of the research. So this is the concept, right? Like this is what I try to achieve. Now this is what I was actually capable of achieving using the public models that I was trying to. Again, keep in mind that most of the tests that I did was using ChatGPT, GPT-5 in this case, and Sonnet. The first thing that I want to show you guys here is to have a good idea of how I approached this research in terms of methodology. Now, this is what I observed based on on the attempts that I performed. I broke down all my steps into 3 phases: data collection, analysis and classification, and decision making. The models are really good at the middle one, at the analysis and classification. So any classification of information that I could do, it was done much faster when using the models. So if you look into target selection, selection of pages to clone for phishing, any preparation and any help in making that analysis and that classification for the recon, the AI did a good job. The models did a good job in terms of classifying that information for me. Data collection, I ended up using the same tools that I've been using for ages. Hunter.io, LinkedIn, Eyewitness, to collect as much information as possible, pass through the models, and see how the models will do. And then I would make the decision as the human at the end of the process if that was good enough for me to proceed or not. So I only wanted to send emails that I thought was good enough for the users to click. I only wanted to use phishing websites that are convincing enough for the users to use. And if I had to make any changes in the future, I would change the source code, so on and so forth, as required and as needed, based on my test case. All right. So here's the first demo that I have for this talk. The purpose here is I collect some pictures or some images from Shodan. So I went to Shodan, went to that part of Shodan that you can collect images. And for those that are not familiar with Shodan, it's a reconnaissance tool that keeps running on the internet and collecting data. So I got from Shodan that image and uploaded to ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT to classify that for me. That prompt that you're seeing in the screen, again, was generated by ChatGPT, but I made some changes through trial and error to get to the point that I was comfortable with what I was generating and achieving the results that I wanted to generate. One of the big differences that I saw here from previous versions of ChatGPT doing this research in GPT-5 is that it takes a while for GPT-5 to go through. So you're going to see that some of the demos will take a little bit of time. Yeah, so you see the report that is being generated by ChatGPT. It tells me if that login page is a good login page for phishing or not, if I can use for something, what is a good test case for that. And it kind of tells me about that page being good for password guessing, but not as good for phishing, which is really interesting, right? It's obvious because that's a Windows login screen, so it would be terrible for phishing, but it's definitely great for password guessing. And not only that, but it gives me the name of the user that is in the login screen, so I can use that in my password guessing attempt. I made some changes to that prompt, and unfortunately, it's not a prompt that I can share publicly, but some of the pages in Shodan actually had a list of users, and the prompt was able to collect the list of users, and then I created an agent for that, use some of the data sources for password guessing, and tell me exactly which passwords I could try against those specific login pages, which I thought was really interesting and automated a lot of the attack. It works fine for ChatGPT, but if you're using the OpenAI, one of the drawbacks here is if you're using the OpenAI API, you're going to need to do a lot of requests to the API with the different images and then collect that later. I solved that problem in a way by using a workflow tool that we're going to do a demo at the end. But the idea here is that if you're running something like Eyewitness and collecting screenshots from different websites, you can plug in the output of Eyewitness into the OpenAI API and ask it to run the exact same code, the exact same test, output that as a JSON, and then it makes it easy for you to select your test scenarios and your test cases. All right. My next test here was to clone an email. So I got one of the emails that we got from HusetCon, and I wanted to generate a clone of this email without creating any code, without me writing any code, right? So what I did here is I exported the EML file from my Google account, my Gmail account, got that, and uploaded that to ChatGPT and asked it to generate an HTML version of that email. And that's the demo that we're going to see next year. So you can see the prompt is fairly simple. And it's going to generate an HTML by fixing the links and removing any trackers from that HTML. This can be really cool. And here's the HTML. Perfectly fine. And it's a perfect clone of the email, which we then can use with the first example that I showed you to add whatever text that we want. And you can see that all the links have been preserved. The HTML code is clean. It's the same thing that you saw before. And now you can make the additions to the HTML code as we see fit. This can be quite interesting for some of you guys that work in the blue team side to perform analysis in the headers of the email, because the same way that you can remove the code, you can also remove the headers and make analysis in the headers based on different data sources that you might be able to collect, right? So if you plug the model into your different data sources to do investigations, you might be able to speed up some of your investigations doing the same technique. So it's not only for the bad guys, it's for the good guys too. All right. I made an addition to that prompt to substitute some of the links to the links of a malicious page that I could create, and it does perfectly fine, right? You can see that I changed the link to redirect to a useccon.demo. That page doesn't exist, but if you created that domain and you bought that domain, it would be perfectly acceptable for the tool to do something like that and speed up even more process, and you wouldn't have to create even more code based on that. Right. So before we move on, a couple of ideas here that we're spreading, right? So things to keep in mind that will help you in doing the same thing or reproducing my research. The first one is that somebody might be watching, right? So everything that you're doing with those models are being monitored by the platforms. So any information that you're providing to ChatGPT, to Claude, it's being monitored by those platforms and being collected by those platforms. So if you're not comfortable with providing, if you don't think that that information should be public, it shouldn't go into those platforms. A couple months ago, there's even some leakage in some ChatGPT sessions that you could Google them and you could access other people's sessions. I think it's been fixed right now, but it was a possibility, right? So if you do not want people to access something very private to you, do not discuss that with those tools. The second thing is that the models want to make you happy. They are there to help you solve a problem. So sometimes it's about how you ask those questions rather than the question that you're asking. So you can make them do something that they're not supposed to do by asking the right way. So think of this as like social engineering for AI models, right? There's more than one way to make people do things for you. Sometimes it's about asking the right questions and going towards a direction that they're not supposed to do to achieve the same objective. And one thing that I learned by trying to play around with some of those models is sometimes asking direct questions is not going to work as well as walking the model through your process. So sometimes you got to talk step by step to the model so it achieves what you're trying to achieve. The last one is these models are not are just tools. They're not the holy grail. They're not going to do everything for you. They're going to speed up some of your work, but they still need some pushing around. All right. So my next step here, and I did this just to challenge myself, was to build an end-to-end workflow. So remember the workflow that we saw at the beginning of the talk? I try to automate the whole thing, or at least a good chunk of what you saw, right? And for that, I used Claude, the latest version of Sonnet. I used GPT-5, and I used a workflow automation tool called N8N, NC8N. I put all this together. I put some APIs in there that was making queries, specifically the Hunter.io API, that was pulling information from those different APIs, and try to put something together that would completely automate the process from selecting the scenario and sending the phishing email into a target account. And that's the demo that you're going to see now. It's small, so you can see how big the workflow is, and you can see it's quite big. So I have multiple steps here that go from starting the recon and trying to identify exactly what are the test scenarios that we're going to do. It's going to generate the email in 3 languages, English, Portuguese, and Spanish. Those are languages that I speak, so that's why I selected them to make sure that the quality was fine. And then create the email and send that email to a Gmail account, or use my Gmail account to send that email. All the output was being saved into a Notion notebook that I put it in there just for demo purposes, just so we can see the quality of what was generated. I did have to speed up some portions of this video, although the demo would take like 5 minutes, right? So I sped up some of the generations here because it takes a long time, and the file would be massive, and I did not want to do that. So I'm going to press play here, and we're going to walk through the workflow. So you can see here that there's no emails, and there's nothing in the Notion notebook. Now here, I'm just going to add a domain. This domain is going to be used to make a query on Hunter.io. That's what you're seeing in the top. And the bottom, I'm using that domain to create the scenario, generating the email content, It goes into the email creation. That's writing HTML based on what it was able to find. And generating the different scenarios in different languages. That's all being saved on Notion. Now you can see on Notion that it created different pages and different campaigns. That's the email that I was able to find. That's the campaign it generated. So you have the pretext, you have the contents of the email, and the references for that campaign. So where did that information from that campaign came from? That's the campaign in Spanish. And the campaign in Portuguese. And finally, that's the email that I received. You can see there are a few bugs in the email, as you could expect. And that's a perfectly functional email and perfectly functional links. What the workflow is doing here is a couple things. For the scenario generation, when I pass that domain, what the tool is doing is to going into the web and making a research and asking OpenAI or ChatGPT to do a research about that domain and look for any news in the past 2 months. You can set that up based on what you want to do, right? It can be 15 days, it can be 2 days. So I grabbed the past 2 months. Based on that research, it's gonna read through the websites, feed that into the model, and ask the model to generate 5 test scenarios based on that information that was able to collect. The way that I told the tool to generate those scenarios was to ask it to think about different ways that a threat actor would use that information to create phishing scenarios. So to create the pretext for those phishing scenarios. So those are the scenarios that you saw in the Notion notebook. Then I got that email. I sent it over to the Hunter.io API to look for emails that are related to that domain. So it gave me a lot of information, right? I didn't do this in this demo, but one of the tests that I performed was to get that email and send to the LLM, cross-referencing with some data from LinkedIn to make a target selection and tell me exactly which users are more susceptible to a potential phishing attack and prioritize those and mark those as priority for the later stages of the attack. Once I generated the pretext, I selected and I ranked the pretext into the pretexts that are more likely to bypass phishing attempts. At the same time, users will be more susceptible into picking those scenarios. So what I did next is I sent that to Anthropic, to Claude, and asked Claude to generate the text for me. So how did I do that? What I asked it to do, like I said before, was to create emails that were compelling, that were engaging as a email marketing agent. It did that for me. And I also add a few things, a few sprinkles of joy in the prompt there, specifically to ask it to bypass some email filters. Like create text that was more likely to not get stuck on certain email filters. So if I know that the target is using Office 365, can I make sure that this does not get caught on Office 365, right? Also, I didn't add into that demo because I wanted for it to be a little faster, but I experimented with a feedback loop that goes into right after the email generation. and it tells me exactly if the intent of that was a phishing email or not and why it thought that. So it goes back into the workflow and tries to generate other messages. The rest, it's pretty much API, different APIs from different providers. You can mess around with as much as you want. One of those APIs there was checking if the email was valid or not, if it was expired or not, and it could go and purchase the email. I cut that off from the workflow because I didn't want to spend money every time that I ran the test, right? But it's something that you can add to the workflow. I tested and it works just fine. Right. So key takeaways, we are going to the end of the talk here. So your phishing workflow can be fully automated if you want to. Although you saw at the end there are some error messages in there, you can bypass that by using the HTML that we generated through the EML, right? So think of this as, along with the domain, you can upload a HTML example or EML file that you downloaded from your Gmail account, right? So a threat actor could potentially go into the company website, put in their email, ask to be part of a newsletter, and copy the HTML of the newsletter to go through that, right? What is interesting here too is that as part of that email generation, I made sure to ask Anthropic or to ask Claude to copy the style, the voice, and the wording that was used in formal communications, right? So when we went to these different websites to look more about the company, it would learn how the company communicates and copy the same style. So when you generate that email, you can generate something that is consistent to everything that the user is, that you would typically read. You might still need to do some cleanup work like we just saw, right? You might need to do some coding. We saw at the beginning the different web pages that we need to make changes. So there's still some cleanup to do. So humans are important here to make that decision of moving forward or making changes. And finally, consider your OPSEC and jailbreaking effort when it comes to using those public LLMs to do some of the tasks that you can potentially do. So overall, I would say it was fairly successful in trying to replicate what a threat actor could do using LLMs to perform phishing attacks. And I appreciate you guys for sitting through the talk. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. Thank you.
We got any questions?
N8N. Yeah,
He was
Nancy
asking about
8
the
Nancy.
workflow tool, N8N.
Yep.
What else?
I appreciate the limitation you placed on yourself with not doing any coding in this process. I was curious to your perception of the technical threshold for producing a viable target list.
You don't need to know a lot, and you can do a lot of it manually in terms of collecting the data. So specifically talking about LinkedIn, right? And forget about all the other data sources. LinkedIn, it's not easy to scrap for users. So there's a lot of things that you need to do, and for that, you would need some technical skills to achieve something like that. So for like a corporate attack, that would possibly be a little more challenging, especially for data selection, right? Because LinkedIn has a lot of information that could help you with data selection, like the person position or something like that. Some of that information is available on hunter.io, which removes some of that technical necessity. So if you pay for the API, you can access a lot of that, and will help you with the target selection. But we go into a territory that for you to be more efficient in data collection, you need to write some code. So think about it this way. You can have a list of users that you're bringing up from leaks, right? From data leaks or whatever email source that you bought on the dark web. Like thinking as a threat actor, right? You bought something in the dark web. There's a bunch of domains from that particular company. You could potentially look for those users in things like Facebook, LinkedIn, right? But scraping those data sources is not that trivial. if you don't know how to code. You would lose a lot of the efficiency by doing that manually, and it kind of defeats the purpose of you trying to automate some of that. It's still doable, and it'll still be like it will still do like 50% of the job by doing the data selection, but you still need to go and do some coding. Now, can you generate that code using some of these tools? Absolutely, you can. But they might not work as intended, and you might fall into a loop of I'm trying to vibe code my way out of the bugs that I created by vibe coding, right? It's even a fun thread on Reddit. Like if you guys look at Reddit, like the Reddit vibe coding, there's so many people that got frustrated because they tried to create like a SaaS platform fully using vibe coding, and 6 months later they are angry that there's all these bugs, and the more they try to fix the bugs, the more bugs appear. So yeah, you can try to get away with vibe coding, but you still need to do some coding to be able to do that. And doing like all this research, I was itching to do some coding because I knew I could solve some of these problems by, man, I can write like a script here that's going to be like 6 lines of code, and I can do that like half of the time. But I wanted to push myself and see like a guy in a basement somewhere in a remote place would be able to do this without knowing any code just because he is malicious in nature, right? So it goes up until a certain point. Limitation goes up until a certain
You mentioned how some of the AI doesn't allow you to do certain things or, like certain safety guidelines, but obviously there's ways you can get around that, put it in a situation or kind of deal. Where do you draw the line ethically on how far you can try to break them or get the answer you want from this versus, compliance issues like you're technically not?
That's a good question. As a red teamer, meaning somebody that does that for a living legally, I would not go as far as jailbreaking OpenAPI to do this stuff that I'm OpenAI to do the stuff that I'm doing, right? Would I train my own model to do the stuff that I'm doing? Absolutely. That's part of my job, right? Like it's like asking me to not write malicious scripts in Python, right? But would I go as part of this research, try to jailbreak some of those models to do what I was trying to do? Honestly, from a research perspective, it doesn't help with the effort. Would a threat actor do that? They absolutely would, right? They would try to subvert the model to do what they're trying to do. So I hope that answers your question. I know it was like a bit elusive, but essentially the bottom line is I wouldn't, because I would just train my own models to do this, but a threat actor would. That's what I draw the line, right? Like these companies have T's and C's. For me to continue to use them, I need to respect the T's and C's. A threat actor does not have to respect the T's and C's. So it's cheaper for me to avoid legal issues and train my own models to do the things that I need to do.
Any more questions? That sounds like a wrap.
Thank you.